Inspiration this morning comes from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, text 35. The Blessed Lord said, "O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by constant practice and by detachment." Now, the commentary for this text talks about how the restless mind distracts us from and hijacks our connection to God. But instead of using this text to help us reach upward today, I wanted to turn it on its ear, so to speak, and consider how the restless mind prevents us from looking inward. Now, to be honest, our intellects are ever vigilant. They mean well, especially at the most primitive level. They are devoted to keeping us safe. Their fundamental mission is to take every sound, sight, and sensation, identify and quantify it. And it does this with innocent intentions, for better or for worse, which sometimes results in gut reactions that in no way resemble our best selves. So yes, the Bhagavad Gita in this regard aims to clear the way for a divine connection. And in doing so, yes, as we live in harmony with the divine, we live more harmoniously in the world. But the restless mind just doesn't block us from the divine and the world around us. It also blocks us from one of the most pure and complex aspects of ourselves, and that is our emotions. Our emotions are complex and nuanced. Throughout our lives, our hearts bloom with an ecstatic yearning towards other people, for example. And each yearning will be different from the next throughout our lives. And yet, our brain will call it love. Our restless mind sweeps up things and dumps them into a convenient box. And this was very useful, as I said, especially in primitive times. Picture walking through the forest on a moonless night, headed back to your hut, and you hear a twig snap. Fear. Walking through a grassy plain with your family and you hear a snarl. Fear. And this is still useful when well calibrated. But even when it is well calibrated, this automatic sorting of our emotions is, in all practicality, something that deprives us of a beautiful and one-of-a-kind experience. Taking the intellect out of the equation, our emotions speak in a rich and nuanced language, a language that shouldn't always require translation. Through this lens, I view my emotional landscape as an endless flower garden, boasting blooms that know no season, know no climate zone. Annual, perennial, variegated, they're all there. Every possible varietal. Consider English, Floribunda, American Beauty. But our restless mind, in its relentless efficiency, says, just a rose. And here, I think we're missing out. Our brains are fencing off vast acreage of this beautiful and florid landscape, our emotional garden. Now, we understand we fail metaphysically when error thinking is converted into action. But the injured and restless mind is doing what it believes it's supposed to do when it incorrectly translates our emotional language. Hence, error thinking. Embarrassment is translated to fear. Rejection is translated to unworthiness. It goes on, and differently, based on the specific injured intellect. But what if we stopped and smelled the proverbial American beauty, enjoyed the American beauty for what it is, appreciated the American beauty for its American beautifulness before declaring it a rose, or errantly a dandelion? I'll share a story from my 20s. I asked my best friends in the throngs of a new relationship how she felt about the guy. "I feel happy," she said. "I feel warm." "So you like him," I cheerfully mansplained. "I feel happy," she corrected, "and I feel warm. And I feel excited when I wake up in the morning, and I feel hopeful when I go to bed. And that's more than enough for me right now." Here she was enjoying the fragrances of a newly blooming garden and wisely rejecting the single plucked flower I was offering to send her on her way. She was, in effect, stopping and smelling the roses. By her account, a garden fool. With this well-disciplined choice, she was not projecting, not evaluating, not anticipating, not what-ifing, not catastrophizing. My best friend understood her restless mind's tendency to mistranslate, and this time, she was not going along for the ride. And here's another story from my 40s. I was a new manager in a federal government position, and my boss warned me about a historically combative, frequently absent and underperforming employee. Naturally, within the first few weeks, all my attempts to improve any of these concerns were rebuffed. And not surprisingly, my attempts to improve the second and third matters only amplified the first one. When one performance counseling session was met with a little more resistance and anger than I expected, I retreated to my boss's office to commiserate. But in due time, the employee was at my boss's open door, proceeded to take me to task, starting with the position that I was the problem. Problems did not exist until I got there. And something unusual happened. I began to notice that my hands and my arms were shaking, my legs were shaking, and this was a new response to conflict I'd never experienced before. I was fascinated. But in taking the time to examine this unexpected phenomenon inside me, the employee got to say their due. And it being the end of the work week, she left, having felt heard. Yes, the giant corpse flower bloomed in my garden, and my stopping to smell it, examine it, unwittingly perhaps in this case, left me actually better postured for another day. Years later, the Washington Post announced that the National Arboretum's corpse flower was going to bloom, something it only does every 4 to 5 years. And the Post article compared its fragrance to that of rotting flesh, hence the name. But I had to see for myself and make up my own mind, and I'm glad I did, because waiting in line, the bouquet from this 10-foot flower hit our noses long before we could see it, giving us plenty of time to consider it. And while I would never ever distill it into a perfume, that experience allowed me to appreciate its complexity and eventually make up my own mind. The blessed Lord said, "O mighty armed son of Kunte, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by constant practice and detachment." Definitely not easy to detach the restless mind from challenging, triggering emotions perhaps, but like my best friend in her new relationship, we can start with the good ones. Now, my copy of the Bhagavad Gita, like most books, comes with praise from other successful writers, I guess in a hope to boost some sales. And I think this endorsement on the back cover from Mahatma Gandhi illuminates my sermon as much as it does the Gita. Gandhi writes, "When doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me, and I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow." May you find your garden bountiful and beautiful.